Okay, so what we're gonna do is something I was really considering teaching because I'm like, it's not really necessary, but I think it's such a great foundation to understand this and to be able to do this. It's like creating a configuration for your API that's flexible and it allows you to like change things on the fly with like minimum effort. So we can create a configuration that's based off an environment and it changes. So when we go deploy to different environments, we don't have to change much. And our API becomes environment driven. So it can adapt and change based off some variables versus us like, oh wait, I gotta make a PR to change this to work for staging. It's like, oh, we don't have to. Just change out this environment variable and then we're good. So that's what I wanna do. So please follow along. I have the code right here. This one actually won't be too much to follow because it's kind of short, but it's actually very powerful. So let's just hop right into this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what I call like a global config. So if you go into source, I'm going to make a new folder here. I'm going to call it config. Inside of config, I'm just going to make an index.ts. And then for every single environment that I think I'm going to run my code in, I'm going to make another file for it. So I'm going to make local.ts. I'm going to make prod.ts. And maybe testing.ts. I could probably even do staging if I wanted to. So these are just like the different modes that I want my app to run in. They might have different options. Like for instance, maybe locally, I want to make sure analytics are turned off. So I'm not tracking myself. But in production, I want analytics turned on. Okay, how would you do that in your app right now? Like knowing our Express app, if we had a middleware, let's go to our routes. You know, let's say I had a middleware here that did like, you know, something like this. It said like track, and it tracked, you know, inside that middleware, it reported to like segment IO or something like to track analytics. How would I turn this off from tracking if I'm running locally versus in production without actually like deleting the code? Right? Okay, that's what we're trying to figure out. That's what we're about to create. We want to dynamically be able to do that without having to change our code. And this is actually a common one. You really don't want to be tracking yourself locally in a production. So inside of the index.ts, what we're going to do is a few things first. By default, node env is not set by default unless you just already set it yourself. So we want to do that. But we also need to install this package right here called lodash.merge. If you've never used Lodash before, it's pretty cool. It's a package that has like a bunch of utility functions on it that people don't really need anymore because it's built into JavaScript. But before it's built into JavaScript, this stuff was really cool. And this one actually isn't built into JavaScript, merge. So we'll npm install lodash.merge. Make sure you save that. Okay. And then what we want to do is on this next line is we want to go ahead and set up a default for our node env. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, process node env equals whatever process node env was, if it was anything, or it's going to default to development. So I'm just trying to make sure I don't overwrite it if it already existed, but if it didn't, please set it to development. So I'm going to do that. Okay. And then what I like to do, I actually like to treat environments and stages separately. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, where it's like maybe you want to run an environment version of your app locally on your computer. So in that example, the stage would be local, the environment would be production. So I actually like to create something different called stage. So I'm going to say something called stage here. And how do I do that here? Yeah, so stages is going to be whatever process.env.stage is if you set one. If you didn't set it, then it's just going to be like local. Okay? And then now we're going to create a dynamic config based off the environment. So now I'm just going to say let env config pretty much be nothing. And then I'm just going to say if stage equals, let's say production. So if we literally are in production environment, this is running on our hosting provider, then what I want to do is I want to say env config, if I can spell config, equals, I'm going to use require here. It's going to require I need to get the production config. And because we're using require and the production file is probably going to use export, we actually have to do .default here. And this is for interop between ES6 modules and non-ES6 modules. We have to do a .default. Okay. Else if stage equals, I don't know, staging, I guess. We want to get or I'll say testing. We don't have staging. I'll say testing. Then env config equals require testing .default. Else env config equals the ones from require the local one. I'm just going to default to local. And then we're just going to export default merge our default config on top of or underneath our env config. So our default config is going to have all the different variables that we need in our app. For instance, I know that stage is going to be whatever stage is. I know that environment env is always going to be whatever process.env.node env is. And then I can do things like, well, what's the port? Well, by default, we'll say the port is 3001. I can also do like my secrets here. So I might make something called secrets. That's an object. And I can say secrets.jwt is always going to be process.env.jwt secret. Right? I can do that. I can say db URL is always going to be database URL. Right? I can do that. That's the default. But because it's being merged underneath this env config, I can override it depending on what environment I'm in, right? So right now I'm saying the default port is 3001, and that's great, but I would never do that in production. You can't set a port when you go to production. The port is given to you. So this would break in production. So what I would do is like, oh, for prod, I'm going to say export default an object. For prod, the port is actually process.env.port because you have to do that for production. It won't work. So when the environment variable is in production and this gets imported into here and merged on top of it, it'll overwrite this port. So port will be process.env.port now and not 3001. So this is how you can dynamically change your app. And then all you have to do is make sure is that you use this configuration object everywhere in your app that needs these values. And you're guaranteed to have a dynamic app. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to say prod has a env port like that. I'm going to say local is 3000. Actually, I'm just going to change prod to like 5000 so you can actually see it. So I'm going to say 5000. So let's do that. I'm going to say 5000. So prod is 5000. Local is 3001. Okay. I'm going to go to our index. We're going to import that config. Import config from config. I'm going to get rid of 3001. Then I'm going to say config.port. Do that. Okay. So we got config.port. So now I'm going to start this. We default to development environment. So when I start it, it should be on 3001 because that's what local defaults to, right? But if I start this with node env set to production, so if I say node env equals production, actually, I think it's still gonna be messed up because I'm doing stage, right? Let's see. Yeah, so stage, yeah, I gotta change the stage. So if I say this is stage, then what I will say is change this to stage equals production. I can run that. And then, yeah, it tried to run it on 5,000. I already have something on 5,000, so I got the error. But it didn't try to run it on 3001. It tried to run it on 5,000. It switched the config to the production one, which is 5,000. So if I change that to like I don't know what's on 5,000 right now. I'm scared to look at it. But let's run it on 5,002 and you can see it runs here.
Probably your GitHub bot.
It's probably some bot I deployed like a month ago, and it's like running rampant on my memory right now. I don't know. But yeah, so you can dynamically change the config, and it's very powerful when you start moving this app around in many different environments. And all we had to do was just change an environment variable. We didn't change any code. We just changed an environment variable. We talked about the config. And if you look at the example that I have here on the site, I have a little more examples of like things you can do. Like for instance, doing things like logging. Sometimes you want to see different levels of logging depending on what environment you're in. You want to see more verbose in development mode, but maybe you don't want as verbose in production mode, clouding up your logs when you're trying to find like a critical error. You want to see something like a little more discrete. You can change that with an environment variable. And then, or maybe for that one time you do want something a little more verbose, you can just go into the environment variable, change the config, and then now logging is a different level. So it's extremely powerful. I highly recommend making sure that your API is driven by some type of configuration that's bound to environment variables so it remains dynamic. Because I promise you, just like earlier where I was going through and that, I was trying to get that API call to work and it kept failing and I kept failing and I kept failing. Okay, imagine that, but every time it fails, you gotta make another pull request for it to deploy and then wait for it to deploy just to find out it doesn't work and then doing it again, right? So if you can put as much as you can to be dynamic, all you have to do is just change an environment variable. And it's not gonna solve all your problems, but it can solve a lot of them.